Hello, everyone. My name is Hady Raphael, and this week on the show, Beth Priestman announced her squad for the two friendly games in Australia. Shamit, Shome and David Gantar stopped by, and can CF Montreal continue its march forward? All of that and a lot more on episode 97 of The Ball is Round. Welcome, listeners of The Ball is Round. So, as you all know, it's our vacation episode. But you know what? We don't know what a vacation episode is. So, I was supposed to be joined by Alex Gangirizik, but unfortunately, he's tied up and he's not able to make it. But you know what? I don't have a replacement because I have someone that's been covering CF Montreal this year in the press box with me, someone that's a very big connoisseur of soccer in Montreal and CF Montreal, none other than Elias Grigoriadis from the Canadian Press. Elias, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's fun to be on the other side of the show I've been listening to for a while. So it's nice to be on this side.
Oh man, it's amazing that you joined me, man, and we're gonna have a bit of a talk of not only CF Montreal but a bit also on Bev Priestman list that was not too long ago, maybe a couple of days ago, released. So two friendly games in Australia. We all know about those games that she's trying to prepare the team for the World Cup. We know that the World Cup is going to be in Australia and New Zealand, so it's coming up soon next year. So it's going to be very interesting to see that squad and to see the team go there and try to beat this Australian side. That's a very, very good side with Sam Kerr being one of the best strikers in the world right now, right?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting to see, just how much this team is going to gel since their victory tour, right? It's obviously a very team that's very familiar with itself. It's a team that has a lot of chemistry and obviously a lot of fond memories, and that's obviously how you bond a lot easier. And like you said, Sam Kerr's still one of the best in the
One
world.
of a kind. One of a
Exactly.
kind, right?
She's always a threat, whether it's the World Cup, whether it's a friendly. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the backline tackles that kind of presence. But it's a really good time for both programs, right? And this women's team has always been a step ahead of the men's, if you will, in terms of the international pecking order. And it's good to see that this women's team is commanding these friendlies against other powerhouses, and it's great to see that the women's game is reaching this level.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. So let's look at that squad. A lot of familiar faces, of course, with Sabrina D'Angelo, Kaylin Sheridan, Kadisha Buchanan, obviously, Shelina Zadorsky, no Vanessa Gilles in that squad. But you do have Alicia Chapman, Jade Rose that comes back with the senior team, Bianca Saint Georges, Shura Yeka, Marie Levasseur that's back in midfielders. You have Simi Awujo, Jessie Fleming, Julia Grosso, Quinn, Sophie Schmidt, Desiree Scott, and of course on forwards, Janine Becky, Jordan Haidama, Chloe Lacasse, Clarissa Lawise, Adriana Leon, Michelle Prince, Christine St. Clair. A lot of familiar faces, but a few new faces like Lisiane Prou, like Simi Awujo, but also Clarissa Larisse. So it's going to be the kind of friendly games where Bev Priestman is going to see if those players are going to be able to gel, like you said, with that the regulars that are usually called up. What do you think they need to do in order to integrate that core of players that have been around for so long?
Yeah, it's always interesting, and it's one of the things I really like that a lot of the best international programs in the world employ, where they have this ability to bring in people that may not make the starting 11 off the bat, but they could see how they gel with the players and everything. And that goes to show just how deep the program is and how they can bring people that weren't initially selected or haven't been selected in other tournaments or other friendlies and bring them in just to see how they run with the core, if you will, right? And it's it's very interesting to see, because again, when you're on the fringe, or when you're just brought in, your job is to see like how well can I integrate myself into this system. So I think that the main focus for all these newer players is just focus on my job, be as good a teammate as I could be, and you know do exactly what is expected of me, and show that I'm reliable, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're at the international level, it's not over 38 games, it's over 5 or 6, right? When you get to the major tournaments, and so you have to show that you could be dependable, right? So being good over consistency is important, because if I go to you, whether it's off the bench, whether it's for the starting 11, regardless of what other game it is, I need to know exactly what I'm getting from you. And
Yeah,
so I
exactly.
think, yeah, their main priority right now is just to work as reliably as possible and be as consistent. And it's always an interesting challenge, because there's all this pressure, especially for a lot of these players who it's the first few times they've been called up, and it's still a relatively new
Exactly.
system for them.
Hmm.
That that's probably their main priority. But once you start playing, all that goes away, all the pressure and everything like that starts to kind of mellow out. But it's going to be very interesting to see how, first of all, how Bev uses all these players, but also how they react, because it may not necessarily be in stuff in formations or in tactics that they're used to at the club level. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they adapt. But I think that she's an excellent coach, and I have no doubt that they're all going to fall in line pretty comfortably.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. As you said, Beth Friesman has done wonders with that national team, for sure. And of course, it's important, as you said, it's important for them to show their worth in training, see if they're able to understand the new tactics and everything. But it's also important for them to start new relationships with the core, and make sure that they're able to bring that uh, uh, extra thing to the dressing room, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
need to be friendly. They need to be accepted. They need to gel into the group, even if they don't even have 1 minute, right? And that's something for the staff to look at, to see how the relationships develop, and that's going to be very interesting for those players too. So interesting. Let's wait and see what
yeah.
the women's team is going to do in Australia. So 2 games on the 3rd and the 6th of September. So that's next week, of course, and we will follow those games, of course, on the Ball is Round, as we usually do. Pretty sure that next week Sam and Eve will give you some sort of analysis of the games, as we usually do on the Ball is Round. Let's move on to our next topic, and that's the biggest topic. In about an hour and 15 minutes, we have CF Montreal traveling to Chicago and playing the Chicago Fire.
Yeah.
Elias, what can you tell us about that game? 8 games to go in a season for
I,
CF Montreal. Is it a very important game, or all the games are going to be important?
I mean, you can go with the cliched answer that every game is important, right? Especially when you're on the road to the playoffs. But Nancy, Wilfried Nancy, since the beginning of the season has said 14 or 15 game gets us in the playoffs, and that's been the goal. And then everything else feels like gravy right now. Like right now, not only are the playoffs likely, but they're in a very good position to host a playoff game, right? And this game in Chicago is kind of just building another gap to another playoff contending team. And this is happening in an Eastern Conference right now where anything can happen, right? And NYCFC has fallen off their pace, where they were supposed to be supporter shield contenders, and now they can't seem to string more than 2 wins in a row together. And Philadelphia has had their slip ups. Red Bulls have had every team that is in that bracket or in that contention to host a playoff game has kind of had their slip ups. In Montreal, we spoke about this after they drew against Miami. We thought
Yeah.
that this was like their big slip up. This was where they had almost dropped the ball in terms of hosting a playoff game, because all these teams were emerging and they dropped these two crucial points. And they've recovered. They got 2 wins in a row, and they've seemingly kind of handled that doubt, or that those questions. This is another huge question, because Chicago at home is they don't win all their games, but it's incredibly difficult to score against them. They've conceded 10 goals in their 13 games at home. So Montreal, where they're this very wheelie and dealy sometimes on the road, where they have these 6-7 goal games and they manage to end out on top, is they may run into kind of a brick wall here, where Chicago is, I think they're almost at 500 on at home, where they're 5-4-4, I believe. And if they run into this extremely well organized defense that has the home crowd and knows how to play at home and not concede, then all of a sudden this change of rhythm may kind of trip them up. And we've seen that happen to them a couple times, where they lose their footing and they have to slowly but surely readjust themselves, and then they kind of regain momentum and then get a result out of it. But this could be interesting because they have gone on the road and gone shocked and then struggled to keep their composure. So this is not as cut and dry as it seems with a team that isn't amazing at home. And I'm very interested to see how Nasi lines up to face a very well-oiled defensive machine.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Chicago may be 12th in the East, but you look at the standings and you're like, they're 12th. They're really very far from the red line, right? From the playoffs line. But when you think about it and you look at it closer, 5 points away from 7th position. So, a 3-point win against CF Montreal will do them so much good for their hopes of qualifying for the playoffs. And let's not forget, you talked about the defense at home, but up front they have some very good players, right? Let's talk about that offensive line with Shaqiri, with all those players that are able to make the difference. What can you say about them?
I've always enjoyed watching Shaqiri. I've always, like, even in England with the Swiss national team, I've always enjoyed the fact that he's very technical but also very direct of a player. And he's gelled in very well in Chicago. He's found a lot of really great moments of play, and they're going up against this Montreal side that has finally kind of leveled out with their XG, right? Because all season Montreal has been the best defensive team if you look at XG, but because of whatever reason, they will concede a goal or two because of a mishap or bad luck or a gust of wind, like anything, right? So it'll be very interesting to see how Montreal keep this momentum going, because they've had two very strong defensive performances, including the 4-0 win, where aside from one mistake that Kamal Miller saved with a great sliding tackle, they didn't really have any slip ups. They kept NYCFC to a 0-0 draw, and that's, again, even without Tati Castellanos, that's a big ask. Against Columbus, they had Cucho Hernandez, and they kept him more or less quiet. He hit the post, but they're doing their job, and it's finally starting to show. So this is just going to be another example of you're running into a team that is in good form. Now you have to back it up. And I think every team in the East is looking at this, because Montreal is playing, New England, they're playing Inter, Miami, they're playing TFC, they're playing Chicago. These are all teams they still have to play.
Yeah.
So every team is looking at this like, Montreal's in great form, and if they beat all these players and we take points from them, then those are bonus points that we're getting on the teams we're directly fighting against. Because you said, there's like 9 teams competing for 4 playoff spots, essentially. And so this is going to be an extremely motivated Chicago team, especially because they've kind of hit a slump, and now they're coming back at home. They want to, jumpstart their playoff bid. And so this could be a very direct Chicago, where they come out and they look for a goal on minute 1, which is something that Montreal's done very well, but they haven't really had to defend against in a long time, which is a very straightforward, and they struggled against it, right? They struggled against Inter Miami, where it was just basically, down the middle and then see what happens. And now without Rudy Camacho, Guerrero Corpos has his second game in a row, and it's going to be very demanding. So it's going to be very tricky. And I'm very curious, because I think Nasi could throw a bit of a curveball and not line up the usual midfielders of Wanyama and Piet. I could see Ismail Kone coming into the lineup just to bring in that kind of energy. He's had a bit of a dip in form. He hasn't had too many minutes, but I think especially because they have 3 games in the next 2 weeks, you could see him come into the lineup just to bring that extra energy and that athleticism. Um, but yeah, I'm hoping we get a very big surprise in terms of a starting lineup from Nasi, because it could be just what's needed to disrupt the way the Chicago team is going to be organized.
It's gonna be interesting. We're gonna talk about the starting lineup as soon as it's out, because it's supposed to be out in the next 10 minutes. So we'll talk about it a bit later. But hopefully we will see that surprise that you talked about, and it's possible, right? I think it could be a good decision if Wilfried Nancy ask of Kone to be here and to play against Chicago. But let's move back to that offense. I want to talk a bit about that offense. We talked about Shaqiri, but we do have Shibilko that's here as a striker. We do have Chris Muller. That's one of my players since the draft, the super draft, when he was drafted by Orlando. That's the one that I wanted Montreal to draft. Unfortunately, they didn't. I think he's one of the great draftees in the last 5-6 years in MLS. So that's a great player too. You have Torres, that's pretty good in the middle. You do have Pineda, you have Navarro, and you talked about the back. With that defense that has a lot of trouble, a lot of success. Shutting team in Chicago, so that's pretty good. But let's talk also about that goalkeeper, Slonina. He's young,
incredible form right now.
a lot of potential, right? A lot of qualities. What do you see in him?
It's very difficult to gauge the potential of keepers. I find it's always been of the positions on the field, it's been the most imprecise science. And I've worked with a bunch of people that train keepers at the club level here in Montreal, and it's always down to the mentality. And it looks like he has, he seems very sharp and he's very aware, and he's always in a good zone, in a good headspace, right? So based on pure potential for keepers, it's, unless they're one of a kind, wunderkind, it's always the little details that you notice. And so it's big saves. Every goalie makes big saves and stuff like that. They always stand out. Everyone, and they're memorable. So everyone's like, remember, he made that great save like 2 years ago. But like it's always it's in the small things. It's the way you direct your back line. It's the way you move the ball, because every goalie nowadays needs to be able to move the ball. It's all in the small things. And he looks incredibly mature for where he's supposed to be in his career right now. And I'm very excited. And he's one of the people that, looking into Chicago, especially because Montreal hasn't really played Chicago recently. Looking into Chicago, he's one of the people that stood out to me because of how highly he's rated by everyone around him. And it's not something you always see with keepers, because, if you don't notice them, they're doing their job, right? And so this is always, I'm very interested in seeing where his career takes him. Because he could be very interesting just based purely on, the small intangible things, right? And he connects very well with that back line, and they're a very cohesive unit, and they're one of the best defenses in the East. So it's going to be very fun to see him go up against, someone like Roman Kyoto, who's in white hot form right now, and that could be a very interesting a battle that we could see manifest.
Yeah, it's funny because Gabriel Solina is bought by Chelsea, right? And loaned back to Chicago. So, we're not the only ones that saw his potential. Yeah. He's with the US under 20 program. He's only 18, guys. Like it's unbelievable at 18. I don't even remember what I used to do at 18. I'm surely I didn't have any talent whatsoever in anything, right? So
I definitely wasn't on Chelsea's payroll, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, but what a great player. And you know what? Let's talk about our team. There was a COVID outbreak in the squad, within the dressing room in Montreal, from what I heard. I don't have a lot more information than that. The only thing that I saw was that Kai Kamara would not be available today for today's game. Any more info on that, Elias?
I haven't heard anything other than, like you said, Kamara won't be in the lineup. But it's always, it's a reminder, first of all, that COVID is still around and you still need to take care and not be too flippant with whatever social situation you're in. But it's also like it's very dangerous because as a team you're always in close proximity. You travel together, you train together, you're in the same locker room. There's always contact, right? So we had it. I had it with my club, with my team last year, where one of the players got COVID and everyone had to get tested and everyone had to make sure. And we were lucky; it was only that one player, right? So it's always very startling because there's like these 24 to 48 hours of very calm panic, and you don't know what's happening, and then you're like, oh my god, is everything going to get shut down and stuff like that. And then so um hopefully it's not too serious, and hopefully that it doesn't really impact the squad too much. Obviously, Kai Kamara with the experience, and he got his brace and in the last game, and he played very well, and he's loved in the locker room. It's obviously going to be a missed presence, but hopefully it doesn't take too many players out of contention, because then you could start seeing the squad get a little bit thin, especially with the fact that they have 3 games in 2 weeks. You get into the playoffs, and you want everyone to be healthy, rested, in good form, and it's the timing isn't ideal, so it's hopefully it sticks at that, but I haven't really heard anything else about what's going on with that particular thing.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you a question, a trick question, right? Is it Sunusi Ibrahim time to come back on the bench, or are we finally gonna see Bjorn Johnson be called up on the bench?
That's an excellent question. I mean, Johnson trained with the team, right? So I very well could see him back in the line. I genuinely don't know. That's a good question. Ibrahim does offer some kind of variety, because there is Toy, there is Kyoto, who are strong physical strikers, and Ibrahim is
Basey.
He's strong, but it's a different approach to the same position. So I don't know. Nasi may want to kind of cover all his bases.
If you were Nasi, who would you choose? I told you it was going to be a trick question.
I'd probably end up picking Sunusi, just because, again, Johnson hasn't seen any action in a long time, and him coming back would probably be better against not a weaker team, but they do have DC United on the schedule, and that would be a good game to kind of ease him in, or maybe off the bench against other teams when everything is a bit more healthy. They do have a nice congested run of games coming up, so we very well could see him come off the bench in any one of those games. But I think that you kind of want to go with less of an unknown, and at least we've seen Sunusi play in the Canadian Championship. Nasi has seen him healthy and training for these last few months, right? So I think he may lean in that direction, and then have Johnson come off the bench at another time just to gauge his match fitness.
That could be interesting. I hope that it's going to be Johnson, to be honest, because one point he's going to have to play, right? Because you do have a big salary. At least let him see a bit of the pitch and see what he can do, if he can bring something. He's still tall. He's still someone that could be used in the last 15-20 minutes, just to maybe, if we're leading and we need someone to hold the ball until the block comes up. He can help in those situations. He can help on set pieces. It's something that could be interesting for the last 10-15 minutes. But Sunusi also would be interesting. So I don't know. It's a trick question that I'm asking myself, right? Because I love Sunusi, and I think that I still don't understand why we haven't seen a lot more of him, because he's a pacey player. He's a player that's physical also, but pacey too. And that's not something that we do have within the squad. He's the only one that has that kind of profile. And I would have loved to see him a bit more. Now, is he improving? Is he learning tactically? Because that was his big problem. So maybe there's stuff that we don't know about. And maybe Nasi is not really happy about his evolution tactically. So maybe that's the reason why we haven't seen him in a while. Just before we talk about the lineup, Elias, let's take a look at the standings, because we did talk about Chicago. So we're going to take a look at the standings. So Philadelphia is first with 51 points. with 1.89 points per game. I think that's the best way of looking at the standings, because you
Yes,
never know with games in hand and everything.
exactly.
Montreal is second with 46 points, so 1.77. So also second in points per game. New York City FC with the 45, so 1.73. And then it drops to the Red Bulls with 152, 41 points. Orlando, 138, 36 points. Miami, same, 138, 36 points. 35 points for Columbus, about 1.4. Then New England, Cincinnati, 131 and 34 points. Charlotte with 32 points, 119. Toronto with 30 points, 1.11. And then Chicago and Atlanta with 30 points, 1.15. Looking at those standings and looking at Montreal next few games, do you think that the top three in the East is locked? Philadelphia, Montreal, New York City FC. Do we already know our top three?
I don't think we know our top three because of the fact that New York City FC has been so inconsistent. But I don't think they slip up to the point where they drop out of the top three. I think Red Bulls is going to stay fourth. But in terms of the top two, it is anybody's title right now at this point because of the fact that Montreal is in the best form they've been since they had that unbeaten run at the beginning of the season, or towards the beginning of the season, and the fact that everybody is coming up with these shock results. Uh, Teams towards the bottom of the standings are really making it very difficult, and I think they're kind of enjoying either playing spoiler or it's the desperation of we're still in this playoff hunt, right? Because as you saw from those standings, 6 points between fifth place and 13th. It's insanely congested. So every team has something to fight for. It's not like people are all right, we're retooling for next year, or we're waiting to see what happens. Every team is realistically in this fight. So uh Wilfried Nancy said this after, I forget which game he said it after. I believe it was the DC United game, but he said, watch out because you're about to see a lot of surprising results in the East. And I mean, it just goes to show that the top teams are dropping points left, right, and center. So if Montreal can kind of keep this unbeaten run going where they minimize the amount of points they drop, they can really sneak up on Philadelphia, especially with that game in hand. That's going to be, people see 5 games, you think 2 games back, but you have to remember that game in hand is going to come into effect at some point. I believe that this midweek game, I don't think Philadelphia plays midweek, and that's when they catch up. So we'll really get to see where both teams are at the end of this match week, and it could make for a very fun sprint to the end because as far as I'm concerned, the top 3, top 4 are more or less secure in hosting a playoff game. But after that, it really is just throwing darts at a board and seeing what sticks right now. You can't predict who ends up where. Someone can get hot, someone get into a great run of form. Teams can fall off the pace, and all of a sudden they find themselves, a couple points back, and it really is the most fun playoff race I've seen in the East for some time. So this is going to, I really couldn't predict. I feel bad for anyone whose job it is to kind of predict how the East is going to look at the end of the season.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun, but
Yeah.
a lot of like Nasi said, like you said, also a lot of games played within teams. Teams confronting each other within the East. So it's gonna be very, very interesting. Let's look at the last few games for CF Montreal. We said there's only 8 games left, with including that one in Chicago. So Montreal is going to Chicago right now, and then hosting the Red Bulls here in Montreal, then going to Toronto, then they'll host Columbus and Chicago again. Then they'll head out to Boston to play New England, then back against DC United here in Saputo, and then in Miami for the last game of the season. Realistically, Elias, what do you think? How many games Montreal have to win to get that top 3? And I'm not going to say to qualify for the playoffs, because I think they need to win 1 to qualify for the playoffs. But how many games do they need to win to get that top 3?
I'd say they'd have to probably win. If I was Nancy looking at this schedule right now, if I want to host a playoff game, I'd say probably shoot for 18 or 19 wins, which is 3 or 4 more wins 4 or 5 more wins. Sorry, and that'll guarantee you a home playoff game. And everything else, especially because you're playing Red Bulls, and if you lose to Red Bulls, and then you have, every team aside from DC United is in the playoff hunt in the East in the schedule towards to the end of the season. So teams move up the standings, and all of a sudden, you're playing them for home playoff position. I'd say that 4 wins is the bare minimum if they want to host a playoff game.
I completely agree with you. I think 4 wins is going to be the minimum to get that top three. But also, I think that we have a game within those 8 games that's, I think, going to be crucial, and that's the game where we have to host the Red Bulls. I think this game is going to be very, very, very important. I want to take the time, Elias, before we talk about that starting 11. I want to take the time to thank Arash Pictures, Najim, that's been sending us pictures to animate our podcast. So you do see our background. I'm just going to show you. So it's an amazing picture of Romel Kyoto. We do see here Kai Kamara scoring a goal. Also, that was a really nice picture too. A picture of the crowd at one point with the bell. We do see Kyoto again scoring another goal here. And of course, Kai Kamara celebrating his goal at Stade Saputo with the 1642. I just want to thank him because he's sending out those pictures and collaborating with us. And it's really appreciated to see, someone really, giving us his job and giving us what he's doing and sharing it with us. And thanks a lot, Najim. Always great stuff that you're sending our way. Let's talk about that lineup, because the lineup is up, and I'm just gonna show it here for those that are listening live. So that's the starting 11 with Sebastian Breza back in goal.
That's very
very interesting. Alistair Johnston, Corbo, Waterman, Miller, Lapalainen, Wanyama, Kone, Mihailovic, Kyoto, Torres. Are we back to a 3-4-3? You thought that there will be a change in the midfield. There is one with Wanyama and Kone back in the mix. No Piet, he's on the bench. No Pentemis, he's on the bench too. No Chouanière on the bench too. Torres back in the starting 11. Mihailovic back after his transfer saga. So let's talk about that starting 11. Elias, what do you think?
Well, I'm definitely interested because they played that 3 central midfielder formation the last few games, and has had a lot of success in breaking down low blocks. And I'm guessing that means Nancy is expecting Chicago to come out with a more attacking approach because they're playing with the 2 midfielders, and we've seen Kone's athleticism kind of offset Wanyama when he's more composed with the ball and a bit more static. So I think that they're expecting a lot of running. And I think that also I just noticed that soon as he's on the bench and not Johnson.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I guess that's that. But I'm very interested to see with how they approach the game. They always say, they especially the reason they've been so good on the road is that they've kind of stuck to their guns, and they've forced their own tempo, and they've forced their own style of play on the home team. And I don't think there's going to be any kind of difference. I think they're going to look for Kone to kind of drive the pace and get the ball to the front 3 as quickly as possible. And I'm also interested to see how Lapalainen does, because he's finally, at least on the offensive side of the ball, he's finally emerged as the last C that we remember, the one that's driving at defenses, the one that's creating chances every time he's on the ball, and the one that's finally finishing. Picking up a very nice winning goal. And I think that all of that put together is a very well balanced lineup, but it's also kind of showing Nalsi's hand that he's going for a very dynamic approach to the game, where he wants to push the tempo as early as possible, and then
Interesting. And now, what I like also is the rotation that
Mhm.
Nancy has been using this year. And whenever you have 3 games week, like this week coming, you see a bigger rotation. And that's exactly what we're seeing, not only with the starting 11, but also on the bench. You talked about, Sunusi being on the bench, but you also see Quizera back on the bench. You see Rida Zuhir back on the bench, Turkelson back on the bench. All those players haven't seen a lot of minutes, and seeing them on the bench is just a way of Wilfried Nancy to say, guys, I didn't forget you. You're still a part of the team. You're still a part of what we're trying to build. If not now, if you're not playing a major role right now, you will play a major role maybe later in your career, in a year or two, but you're in the mix right now. You can deserve minutes at one point. And I think that's very interesting because you keep everyone involved
Yeah.
within that group, because it's the group that's going to win. It's not 11 players, it's not 13 players or 15 players that are going to play during that match day. It's the group altogether, the 22, 23 players that are going to be able to lift CF Montreal to whatever glory they're going to achieve at one point. So it's interesting. And do you like that kind of rotation, or do you think that it's not the time for rotation with 8 games left in the season?
Well, I don't think Nelsie's ever shied away from rotating the squad,
Yeah.
and he's done it basically all season, especially with the bench. So him bringing different people in and out of from the reserves into the onto the bench is not something I'm too shocked with. He always likes to say, I make a game plan for the first half and then we'll see about the second half, right? So it's a very varied bench. You have ball winners like Piet. You have people that could push the ball forward like Quizera and Brogiard. You have all sorts of things for any kind of situation. I think that's also something important that you need to have um, when you're on the road, because you never know what's going to happen. It's always unpredictable on the road. And I think that's kind of something he's maybe keeping in his back pocket. As for as for rotating the squad, it's important because, like we just saw with the whole transfer saga with Georgie, right? A lot of emphasis has been made on we are a from the message from the club is that we are a development club. We try and take youth, we try and improve it, we try and grow, and we try and build from our own system, right? So having youth in the substitutes bench, especially after um, all of this transfer saga with Georgie and who's going to replace him next year, especially with Nasi trying all these different players when he was out injured. It's just kind of doubling down on the fact that we have the notion that Nasi has these different assets that he can use
Yeah.
in the future, right? Torkos and Quizera, even Brogiard is still relatively young, right? He's by no means old. So
Yeah.
having all those players there is incredibly important because, again, these young players are extremely motivated, right? They haven't had many minutes, like you said. So putting them on, if especially if you need someone to hold on to a lead or to just run their lungs out, these are the people you're going to put on the field, right? Even Samuel Piet, obviously, if you need someone to run, there's very few people that do it better than him. But if you need the youngsters to play a physical role and play with a lot of passion and intensity, these kids have been frothing at the mouth for some playing time. And I think that's good. That's a good thing to kind of unleash, especially on an unpredictable game.
Oh, that's very interesting. A great preview, I think, of the game. CF Montreal traveling in Chicago. Elias, thank you very much for taking the time
Thank you so
today.
much for having me.
Oh man, it's really I've wanted to invite you for a while now, so it's really nice. Thank you for answering the call. But also, how can our listeners reach you if they want to read what you do, if you want to see what you have to talk about? Is it
Yeah,
only on social media? Where can they read you?
I'm on Twitter at the E Grigoriadis. I write for the Canadian Press, so it's a wire service. So there's no
Everywhere.
one place to kind of find it, but I do share a lot of it on my Twitter. So if you're ever looking for that or for a whole lot of pointless comments about Formula One and TV shows, then that's where you can find me. But yeah, it's mostly there and for the Canadian Press. So yeah.
Thanks a lot, Elias. So we're going to move on with the rest of the show. Of course, we do have two interviews that are pre-recorded. So let's start first with the former CF Montreal player, Shamit Shome. We were able to interview him with myself and Eve. So good interview.
Right. So we are joined by a familiar face to many a Montreal fan. This evening's guest is Shamit Shome, former Montreal Impact player from 2017 to 2020. And Shamit's currently playing in CPL with FC Edmonton while on loan from Forge FC. So Shamit, you are obviously a very accomplished individual already. You went pro from the MLS Super Draft, and while playing competitively and professionally, you also completed an engineering degree and honed your French language skills in Montreal. How did you manage to juggle all of that?
Yeah, looking back on it, I guess it's kind of tough to imagine how I was able to balance it all. But I think when I was in the moment, it was just, I didn't have many distractions. I was pretty young in a new city. So having footy, having school, and having, French as something to learn just kept me busy, which is good. I didn't want to have too much free time where, stuck at home watching TV, kind of doing nothing. So just about time management and keeping myself busy and focused on what I wanted to do, I guess. And engineering was something that I always wanted to do. So I made sure that I could do it while playing soccer as well.
Yeah, now, of course, you went away from Montreal, of course, but pretty sure you kept your French. So do you want to answer in French the next question? Or are you okay with that?
I wish I could, but I won't. It'll be a bit difficult. It's a bit rusty now.
No worries. So what is your fondest memory of playing in Montreal?
There's a couple. I mean, making my MLS pro debut, I guess. I think the best one I would say was winning the Canada Cup in 2019.
Excellent choice.
Yeah, just because that was a good season for me. Personally, I was pretty involved in those Canada Cup games as well. And winning in Toronto was pretty cool. And I think that was the first time we won the cup in a couple of years, 3 or 4 years. So yeah, I think definitely that's my fondest memory.
I know. I think that's my fondest memory of your career in Montreal as well. So this year, you are signed with Forge FC, but you're back on loan with FC Edmonton, the team where everything started for you really as a player. How is it playing for Edmonton in CPL? And do you notice any big differences from when the team was in NASL during your first stint there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with saying, I guess, I definitely enjoy playing back home, especially being close to my family. I think that was a big reason why I decided to come back to FC Edmonton, aside from, other things. But if I was to compare the level, I'd say, I'd like to think it's pretty similar, maybe a bit less physical, just because NASL had, seasoned veterans and older players and whatnot. But I think the technical ability and, the tactics within the league is at a very similar level to the NASL, I would think. Just probably that lack of physicality, just because, CPL is obviously a bit younger with a bit younger players that are kind of up and coming. But pretty similar. I wouldn't say it's too crazy.
Now, you made your MLS debut in the final game of 2017, replacing Patrice Bernier as he exited the pitch for the final time. What was the experience like for you? You were kind of involved with the last game of Montreal legends like Patrice Bernier.
Yeah, it was very cool. I've been asked about that a couple of times, and I think just in the moment it was very, very special to share that with him. And he may not think of it this way, but I'm sure he'll remember that I was the one that came on for him. So that's kind of cool. He's a guy that had a very, very successful career, both international and at the club level. So for me to come on for him, I think in that moment was really special and motivated me to kind of push myself the next couple of years. And, I was kind of able to do that, which is good. But definitely a very cool memory that I'll have is, that was my MLS debut, but it was also me coming on for Patrice.
You came on for yet another legend playing his last match for Montreal, Nacho Hady. I don't know. Shamit, you just have a weird sense of timing.
Yeah, something with me and Montreal legends and coming on the field. So
yeah,
another cool moment. It was a bit different, I guess, because it wasn't completely guaranteed that he wasn't coming as compared to Pat. But I remember the ambiance in the stadium was still kind of interesting, with that being, Nacho's last game. I think some of the fans kind of saw it coming, and so there's a huge cheer, kind of like how it was for Patrice. So yeah, definitely another cool moment. And I'm sure Nacho will remember his last game getting subbed off was when I came on. So pretty cool. Yeah.
We should have asked him yesterday, but we didn't have a chance. Now, you had quite an exciting year in 2019 with Montreal. You were playing in nearly every game. What happened the next year in 2020? Was it only a lack of confidence from the coach towards you, or something else happened? Like, tell us a bit about what happened, status really going from one way to another.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of things. I guess the first thing I'll say, well, I don't want to make any excuses ever for sure, but I think one of the things I'll say is maybe being a younger player and having constant new coaches, I kind of experienced it 3 or 4 times, is that you always have to prove yourself over and over again. And, I was okay with doing that for sure. But I think at some point throughout that 2020 preseason or beginning of the year, I kind of noticed that, maybe I wasn't doing enough to kind of impose myself on the games to show that I deserve to play and deserve to start. And so I guess that's where it kind of started. Going onwards, I think maybe a lack of confidence in the coaching staff, a lack of confidence in myself, kind of maybe knowing what I was capable of doing, but kind of not feeling like I had the freedom to do it or that confidence from the coaching staff. And so that kind of made me not play as well as I would have liked to as well, I think. Towards the end, I think I started picking up a groin injury because I started playing outside back a little bit. And I think that kind of contributed to me to getting a little injury that kind of kept with me, I guess, from September onwards and just fighting that off. So I guess just a combination of everything. But at the end of the day, there's nothing I regret. If anything, I wish I could have been in Montreal longer, been involved longer, but it's a business. And at the end of the day, that's how it goes with moving on to and finding new players.
Exactly. Like you mentioned, you had a lot of coaching changes during your time in Montreal. You played under Mauro Biello, Remy Gard, briefly Wilmer Cabrera, and then finally Thierry Henry. Besides maybe Wilmer, because he was only there really briefly, what are some of the differences that you recall from the managers that you played with?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really lucky to experience so many different coaches in a short amount of time. It's also difficult because you have to prove yourself every time. But I'd say, each person had a different approach to the tactics and a different approach to even how they run their training sessions. I think, let's say with Mauro, he was a lot more friendly with everybody, kind of as an ex-player. Everyone felt a lot more comfortable with him and could, chat with him. And I think that gave players confidence. Remy was very stern on kind of what kind of tactics he had in the structure of the team, kind of having specific movements and different ways to kind of build out from the back, what to do when you're in the final third, where like the midfielder runs, like the channel runs, stuff like that. So very structured and kind of a pretty tight identity in terms of what you have to do, but definitely focused on staying solid defensively. And I think for Remy back then, it was, you get a clean sheet, you put yourselves in a good position to win the game. And so that's kind of the direction he went. Even Wilmer, when he came in, he kind of scrapped a lot of things we did in terms of like passing back to the goalkeeper and stuff like that. He had, and he helped us, to be honest. There were certain things where he implemented that were, kind of even almost playing a bit more direct and getting into the opposition half. And with Thierry Henry, it was a lot more just football, playing, building up from the back, possessing the ball. So definitely, I think the interesting is with Henry is I learned a lot of things that I wish I could have implemented more. But being in CPL, I've been trying to, I always keep that in mind of the little, I guess, tips and tricks that you would give me and give the team. But yeah, I think that's the difference, I guess.
Yeah, you can maybe consider yourself a bit lucky. You said that you replaced Patrice Bernier, you replaced Nacho Piatti, you were coached by one of Montreal legends, Mauro Biello, and then by Thierry Henry, one of the international legends. Like, what kind of experience do you get from all those people, all those ex-players, coaches, and everything? Is that, a big, experience that helps you right now in your career?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just so cool to kind of pick the brains and be a part of teams with all those kind of legends and just learn from them. And to be honest, I think maybe that's why I feel like I'm good at understanding the game, is because I've seen all these different kinds of strategies and tactics and understandings of the games that so many different players and coaches have, because everybody sees the game differently. But yeah, definitely just trying to internalize, I guess, everything I've learned and also seen in terms of the way players play, like a guy like Patrice, a guy like Nacho. Yeah.
So kind of turning to what you're up to these days. It's your second season in CPL. How do you rate the league compared to MLS?
Yeah, it's obviously not the same. It's not as fast and as physical, I'd say, but I think the league is actually pretty impressive overall with, the young players are pretty talented, and it's shown with the moves that some of the players are starting to make. So it's a decent little league, and I think slowly but surely more, I guess they'll get more international looks with teams realizing that the CPL has good players and that there's players capable of playing at a higher level. So for me, the last 2 years I've enjoyed it. I think FC Edmonton hasn't done as well as I wanted, and so I kind of don't like that. But for me, I'm excited. I'm just happy to play back home and represent Edmonton as best as I can and kind of do what I can for the community.
Yeah, now the Eddies had their fair share of difficulties in the past couple of years now with, not only on the pitch with the FAT really selling the club to the league. Mm-hmm. How is it to be playing for a club owned by the league? Do you think, how do players feel? Like, is it unsettling? Are you not really sure the direction of the club that the club is taking? Like, how do you feel as a group, as players on the pitch?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you this in a kind of, I guess, long answer, but like early on in the season, you don't really think about it. You kind of just in the moment, you see all the chatter about being ran by the team, but that's not something you really worry about. You're just worried about coming to training, putting in the work and performing in games. But I guess now that we're kind of reaching that last 2 months, 3 months of the season, you can tell that it's definitely lingering a bit more in players and coaches and everybody's thoughts, just to think like, what is the future? What is going to happen next year for guys who are looking for contracts at the FC Edmonton next year? They don't really know, right, with the new owner and everything. So there definitely is a bit of uncertainty, I guess. But that's something that you don't really feel when you're on the field or playing in games. You don't really think about that stuff. It's kind of when you step back and kind of look at the bigger picture of what's my future, what am I doing next year, where am I going to play? But I think for the most part, FC Edmonton and whoever's been running it has been doing a good job in terms of making sure it's been at a fairly good standard and maintaining, what's expected of a professional team.
Good. So your coach this year is Alan Koch with FC Edmonton, obviously. He didn't have a ton of success in MLS, but he was really important for FC Cincinnati when they played in USL. Mm-hmm. How do you see him as a coach right now in CPL?
Yeah, I mean, I was really excited to sign with Edmonton when I saw he'd be the head coach, just because of the experience he's had in MLS. I thought that would be a good thing. I think he's a coach that's very structured and detailed in what he wants. I think he's been a bit unlucky with how the team's been doing. I guess our first year we did okay, but this year with kind of the cards he's been dealt has been difficult. But he's definitely a guy that I think he gets along well with the players. He has a good relationship with the team off the field, and that's so important, I think. Mm-hmm. And on the field, I think he's a coach that he deserves to have a bit more results going his way, or better results going his way. But yeah, I think he can have success in the CPL. It's just a matter of kind of when and kind of what situation he's put in. But definitely a coach that I respect a lot. He's given me a lot of freedom, and he's given me a lot of support and confidence to kind of play the way I want to and play the way that I think is right.
Awesome. And a big honor for you this year as well. You were named captain of FC Edmonton.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, tell us what that means to you, and kind of tell us if that's changed the way you approach the game at all.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's I guess a big sense of pride and honor, especially just to represent Edmonton. Obviously, we're a young team, and I'm one of the guys with a bit more experience. So just trying to help out the younger guys as much as I can. And yeah, definitely, I guess a little bit of a different approach where I'm kind of not just worried about myself and kind of, keeping my head down and going to work like I was in Montreal and guys coming to me and giving me advice. I'm kind of in a different situation now where I'm trying to talk to other guys, give them advice and push them the best that I can to get the best out of them. And it's difficult because there's times where I forget that I'm like, I need to, there's a couple of guys that maybe aren't in the roster, or they haven't been training well. And it's a matter of how can I help them to kind of, get them back on their level. And so there's definitely a lot of things that I can learn from this past year, but definitely a huge privilege to be the captain and kind of have that experience as being a leader on the team.
Nice. Now, you said a bit earlier that, right now, because, almost at the end of the season, players, coaches, you're starting to ask questions. It's not really the case for you because you're under contract with Forge FC. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that as, being a privilege, to have a contract for next year? And how can you help? Are you trying to help your teammates in confronting those fears and everything, or being the captain and the veteran in a dressing room?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting question. I'd say I guess what I've been trying to do off the field is obviously we're focusing on Edmonton and getting results and whatnot, but with looking at the bigger picture is just also having conversations with guys and getting them to make sure they're talking to their agents to know kind of what's going on, to keep them in the loop, and to also, if they're not sure what's going on, to start making sure they keep their options open, because it goes quick in the soccer world, right? And I had to experience that when my contract ended with Montreal. It was a quick window. I had my surgery, and just like that, I found out they weren't picking up my option, and then from there, I kind of had to scramble and figure out what I was going to do. I had Edmonton in my back pocket always, which was nice to have that, but a lot of guys don't have that, right?
Yeah.
So definitely just trying to help them feel comfortable and kind of realize that, look, like, Edmonton may not pick up your option next year. They may not want to keep you either. So you got to be active in making sure that you're trying to get other opportunities available for yourself, so that, you can kind of prove yourself to be the type of player that you are.
Yeah. Now you're obviously very, concentrated on FC Edmonton right now, but in the back of your head, are you taking a look at what Forge FC is doing, since, it is the club that right now you have a contract with? And what can you tell us about, a team like Forge that won it all in CPL for a few years? Yes, they lost it last year, but they're like the biggest club right now in CPL since the beginning of the league.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is obviously I don't know for sure what's going to happen with Forge next year, whether I end up they picking up my option or whatnot. But even playing against them and seeing how they do in the league, they're definitely the most well-run team. They have a structure, the way they play, they have a clear identity, and I think they're very dominant on the league in that sense, in terms of the way they play and sticking to that identity and playing teams off the pitch. The couple games that we played with FC Edmonton as the team that we have. And other guys on our team will say the same, that we just felt like we got played off the pitch. Everywhere we go, we're always late. So they have a really clear structure, and obviously Bobby's done a great job. They have a lot of good players on their team, and they've built a really strong team. So I think at some point I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to kind of surprise some MLS teams like they almost did to Montreal, I think, last year.
Yeah,
I'm sure that'll happen soon, because they're very strong.
No, definitely. And like you said earlier, CPL just seems to be getting stronger and stronger every year, especially watching those transfers departing. It's been wild this year to watch where players are going. So it's been really exciting. But as we are a Montreal-based process, we would be remiss if we did not ask you. You've got some French-speaking players in your squad. Do you ever practice and keep up on your French with any of them?
I wouldn't say I practice, but I would say I can certainly eavesdrop on their conversations, because I can understand this. I think in terms of speaking with them, they talked to me in French a couple of times, and I can understand, obviously.
Yeah.
Talking back to them is a bit difficult, so sometimes I just go back to English, because that's my safety.
But
yeah, definitely my French is still there. It's a bit rusty. We've had some of the francophone like CBC French come out to our
like Radio Canada.
Yeah, and so like they asked me to do a couple of interviews in French, and so I did.
Cool.
But a lot more rusty than how it was in Montreal. So they're not my best moments, but I think I still have a little bit of the French. It's just a bit rusty because
that's amazing.
I don't have to use it all the time here.
No, it's my second language, so I totally get it.
Yeah.
You really do have to keep it up or you lose it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So you said you eavesdropped on their discussions. Do you have some interesting comments on one of the discussions that you discovered that you weren't supposed to know, or?
Nah, for the most part, it's nothing crazy. I make sure if there's serious conversations where I shouldn't eavesdrop, I kind of make sure I'm not paying attention. But no, there's definitely just little jokes that the French guys like to make. I kind of get in on it, and I say, "Hey, I heard that," or I start laughing too, and they're like, "Oh, you understood?" I'm like, "Yeah, I did." So, the good thing is they can't talk. They can't talk behind my back because I'll understand.
Exactly. That's for sure. Now, Shamit, I just one last question that I just added right now. Like, do you have a role model, like a player that you love watching, or that you when you were growing up, you were looking at, and you were an idol or someone that you were looking up to?
Yeah, I think growing up, I was always an Arsenal fan, so I really like Cesc Fabregas in his old school days.
Good choice.
Yeah, that was him in his prime. And then I guess with the Real Madrid midfield, Toni Kroos, Luka Modric, those have been the guys I kind of watched after Fabregas that I really looked up to, just the way they control the way they play. Obviously, there's guys like Xavi and Iniesta, but for me, they were just on another level of craziness, of talent. So definitely like Toni Kroos, Luka Modric, and just the way that midfield plays is what I looked up to, or what I really followed a lot.
Nice.
Awesome. So Shamit, we can't thank you enough for taking the time with us this evening. really interesting to touch base with a former Montreal player. I think a lot of Montreal fans do have, fond memories of you for sure. Again, I know my mom is a Montreal fan, and she was very excited when I told her that we would be talking with you this evening, because she keeps an eye on you on One Soccer. So thanks so much. And is there any other projects in your life or any social media or anything where soccer fans, Montreal fans, CPL fans can keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, just my Instagram and Twitter. I don't post much, but I'm pretty easy to find. Shamit Shome, you'll find it somehow. But thanks for having me. It was nice to talk about the memories of Montreal and kind of think about the good times I had back there for the 4 years I was there.
Wonderful.
Thanks a lot, Shamit.
Such an interesting interview with Shamit Shome. Had a lot of fun, doing it. Elias, any words on Shamit and what he left here in Montreal?
I mean, unfortunately, he left before I started covering the team, as I told you. But he's a great interview and very well spoken, and seems like a very great presence around the locker room. And it's nice to see his growth as a youth player, like he was talking about. Needing all the advice, to him being now the elder statesman, the veteran, and being that source of comfort or wisdom for all these up and coming players. So it's very nice to see how he's grown and evolved into this role, and it's nice to see him still doing what he does best.
Yeah, the student becomes the master, right?
Exactly.
So that story of life. So we do have another interview, and that one was very interesting. That Sam was able to reach out to Dave Gantar, that was a former pro referee here in MLS that is retired right now, but he gave us a very nice interview. So there it is right now. So let's start this.
Well, I'm happy to be joined by my guest, Dave Gantar. Dave, thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thanks for bringing a referee on.
Yeah, well, you're our first. We had one, a friend of our show who comes once in a while. He's a provincial referee, so he breaks down decisions sometimes, but it's the first time we have a former pro, so we're really happy to have you on.
Glad to be here.
So Dave, you became a national referee in 2004, FIFA ref in 2011. You refereed over 200 MLS games, Gold Cups, World Cup qualifiers, among others. But first off, how did you decide to start your journey into refereeing, and what did the pattern look like to get these assignments and accolades?
So to start refereeing goes all the way back to Slurpee money. And I think you know what I mean at the Kushtar there, right? You get your Slurpee, you wanted a couple dollars in your pocket to go buy some Slurpees. My dad was the soccer director at the time in the community, and he said, Dave, we need to give you some responsibility here. So as a 12-year-old, I took it as a 12-year-old. I took the initial course, and then what is it called? It takes time. You go through cycles, you go through the levels, you move from what is it called? From back then it was class 3 to class 2, and then to class 1, and then somebody sees you and they nominate you as a national, and you work your way up and you become a national referee. And this is in the days, I remember it was Swangard Stadium, it was Vancouver Whitecaps, still Toronto Lynx and Montreal Impact were there. It was the three, right? That was the league. And then Calgary Storm and the Edmonton, I don't know, that changed so many times, the names on that. So Edmonton Aviators, I think it was, for a year or two before they folded back in the A-League. Right? Like we got some history there.
Oh yeah, really.
Yeah, and you work your way up, and then it's, I don't know, you don't make as many errors, and you learn and you grow, and guess what? People give you more games with more responsibility, and you're fortunate on that front. So that's the way that works.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the games that was a big responsibility for you was the first ever Canadian Premier League game between Forge and York 9. So how was the process? How did you learn that you would be refereeing this game, and how was the whole experience around it?
The assignment for that came through just in the regular channel. We get it through our assigning system, gameofficials.net. And it comes through, and I was in MLS at the time. I was a FIFA referee at the time, and look, I am born, raised, I will die a proud Canadian. And to be able to do that game look, I was the guy, the Edmonton Brickmen, the Edmonton Eagles, the Edmonton Drillers. I was the kid taking the bus to the stands and to the stadium to watch those games. To be able to do the first game in the new Canadian League for me I can't say enough. It was amazing. It was awesome. The environment was amazing. You know, there, I think they had 20 to 30,000 people were there. It was a really neat game as well. So.
And one very important game in your career, obviously, was your last one. It was at Stade Saputo when Montreal defeated Toronto in the 2021 Canadian Championship final. So just walk me through how your day was, and at what moment did you know you were retiring? Was it like a few months before? Was it a few days before? How was it?
Yeah, I knew I was going to retire probably. I had been thinking about it for a good year. It was probably the start of the season where I had pretty well decided on it. In September, I retired from doing MLS games because I wanted to finish in Canada. Is again here, proud Canadian for you. And so in September, I did my last MLS game, and then I just did CPL games, and then they gave me the Canadian Championship as the last game. And what I can tell you is the crew had a picture of me from the game in Edmonton, Canada versus Mexico, where I wore this crown and something like that, and they had it in the dressing room, and I told them, hide it, take it all down. Today, I wanted the game to be, we're focused on the game. Yeah. Let's get through it, and then we can celebrate afterwards. For me, the game's always been the most important, and that's what we focused on, and that's what we did throughout that. And then, you know, I blew the final whistle, and I was like, "That's it. Okay, now we can celebrate a little bit." So
nice. And you know, Eve, one of our co-hosts here, she arrived very early to the stadium at Stade Saputo on that day, and she saw you. You know, you gave your spray to a little kid, and he was playing with. What happened on that one?
Okay, so this is an interesting. It's funny they noticed that. I don't get a lot of people questioning that, but every game that I've ever done when I've had spray, this is a thing for me. It's part of my pregame ritual. I like to have at least one person in the stadium thinking something nice about me, And so before the game, I seriously, it's a young boy, young girl in every game I've done where I've had a spray in my hand. There's been some boy, some girl that I give them the spray bottle to. They spray a line. Sometimes they spray themselves. Sometimes they spray their dad. It gives them a good laugh. It all that stuff. But that one child in that stadium in every game I've done since spray was introduced, think at least something nice about me. So I'm okay with that. That's why I do that.
Oh, that's really cool. And you know, yes, your game at Stade Saputo was your last professional game, but you did referee one final game afterwards. So what was that game about?
Yeah, it's funny the number of times everybody said this is Dave Gantar's last game, and I've always said my last game was going to be walking from my mom's house down the same alley that I did to the same field where I first started doing games. And so it was in June of this year, I refereed a game between an under-9 boys and an under-9 girls team. And I can tell you, I was nervous about that game going in. Like it was an interesting one, but it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. So that was my last game.
Nice. So I'll bring you back to maybe more of concrete refereeing stuff. So, you know, when you're a player before a game, sometimes, you know, 5 minutes before the game, players have their rituals. Some are pumping music in the back. Some are like really focused. What was for you guys 5 minutes before the game? What does it look like in the referee's room?
Everybody, look, every ritual that you can dream of it's the exact same thing for referees. And it's typically the referee, the person with the whistle that is the one that allows things to happen or not. So some it's loud music, some it's silence, some it's there's a different piece for everybody in that 5 minutes beforehand. You know, and look, when you talk about superstitions, I was a guy that I never brought my toothbrush and toothpaste into the dressing room. Like as hokey as that sounds. but that was something I could not do. So
is there a reason to that, or?
No, there
Okay.
must have been a game way back when that it was linked where I had my toothbrush and toothpaste with me. So I never brought it with me for over 20 years or something like that. So look, we're humans. We go through that same rituals, the same routines that others do to get ready. And I know that might be shocking that we're human beings, but referees are human beings, and we do the same things to get up for games. We're amped up. We have to get up for games and get ready to be at the same level as the players are going to be in, or the game's going to be, and what we need to be for it.
And that's interesting, because it kind of segues me into the next question, because, you know, we often have the feeling that a referee just pops up to the stadium and he's there and he's ready to ref, but there's a whole lot of, you know, technicalities leading you to a game. So, you know, I'll just give an example. Let's say, you know, you're from the west coast of Canada, and you have to referee in California. So when you get your assignment, how does that work? Do you already have your plane tickets, your hotel all booked, like your transport to the stadium?
Yeah, so look, that's evolved like over the years. The most recent, and where we're at, which is kind of nice the way they're taking care of us, is they have a travel agent that we contact, and we send our preferred flights, and we say, here's when we want to go and when we want to return. So it gives us some flex. In the old days, you would just get a flight and you would take whatever they gave you, because they would give you the cheapest flight, you know, sort of being the way it worked. So now, like, we have families, we have things we want to get back to in our cities. So it's really nice. There's been a lot more flexibility on that side. And then the same travel agent typically was the one that booked the hotels as well.
Okay, cool. So, you know, like you said, referees are human, and sometimes you guys have a bad game. So how do you refocus after a game in which you were disappointed with your own performance?
I've never had a bad game. I don't know what you're talking about.
Good thing.
Now, this is going to sound a little bit obvious, but it wasn't that long ago, in the last 8 years or so, that for me personally, one of our referee bosses said to us, "Hey, guys, it's normal to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes." And the cycle of I'll tell you, before that, I would beat myself up, and you'd go through cycles, etc. on that side. And that little statement, and look, it's triggers for different people, is it's normal to make mistakes. You need to move on from them. You need to learn how to move on from them. And by the way, I just started watching Ted Lasso and all that stuff. So the memory of a goldfish is I love that concept. I think that's right. Yeah. You need to have the memory, learn from it, and then have a memory of a goldfish and dump it out and move on. So go through the cycle. Something that's healthy is what I'm going to say to you here, not nights and nights of lost sleep and looking at that clip over and over, analyzing it, figuring out what you would do differently to get it right, and then moving on. That's the biggest thing that you can do for yourself.
But yet there's a part of you that, you know, you have emotions. You can't just, you know, clear everything out of your head. So, you know, when you're aware that, let's say, a manager or a, you know, big name player criticized your performance in public, or, you know, you had a very hostile response to decisions by fans, is there any apprehension to go back to that particular stadium or to referee that team?
For me, it's not. And in fact, I don't read the news. I don't go online onto discussion forums to look for people saying nice things about me, because they don't. Yeah. I don't, you know, listen to the managers afterwards for their take on things, because I don't get my chance in front of the media to give my perspective on it. And there's no point. They have a job to do. They have, you know, teams that when they get closer to the playoffs, and, you know, they're on that bubble and it's getting clear that they're not going to make the cut, you know, they're trying to save jobs and they're going to blame others, you know, more or less. It's a tactic. It's, you know, it's something, Sir Alex Ferguson's book that you read, it's a tactic he says I used to deflect, you know, pressure from my players, to deflect pressure from my team, etc. on that. So look, they have a role to play, is what I say. Fans have a role to play. They paid money to yell at me, so, you know, they can do their thing. I'm okay. What I can say is, for me, I especially as I got more experience, my heart rate and my calmness on this things or emotion was flat.
Really?
You know, I might look angry on the field, I might look upset. I never was. It was inside. It was, this is all an act and something that I have to go through inside. As soon as I do have emotion or I do have a reaction, what you're saying going into a game, I need to correct that and quickly. It can't happen. It will muddle me up way too much. So
it's interesting because you said, you know, we don't have the opportunity to take to the media after game. Would you have liked to have that opportunity?
Loved it. I would have loved it. I think there's a period of time you need to reflect on things. The number of times I would have, within 5 minutes of seeing the replay, I would have gone out in front of the world and said, I got that wrong. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. You know, I love this game. I think I affected the outcome of the game, and I apologize for it. And then there would be a face to this, and people seeing that we actually take accountability for things, right? So yeah, I would have loved to do that. On the flip side, as a coach is poorly quoting law, you know, right before me, I would, in a very cordial and nice way, correct it and say, refer to page, etc. and that we did this absolutely correctly today, and know that, you know, we did a good job. So
nice. And right now there's a big hot topic especially in North America. It's diving and time wasting. And we often hear oversimplified solutions such as referee should yellow card every player who falls without contact, or referee should yellow card every player who wastes time and add 15 minutes at the end of each half instead of 4 or 5. So, you know, obviously these solutions are probably impossible, but is there a reason why we see so few yellow cards for diving and time wasting? Is it something that you take on yourselves? It is something that is asked by, you know, higher ups? So what's up with that?
So these two topics are, for 15, 20 years, they, like in the professional leagues, it's been talked about all the time. I'll have to talk about them differently, by the way. Simulation versus time wasting. Okay, simulation is, it's difficult at full speed, etc. I can tell you clips and scenarios where I was 100% sure the person dove and they didn't, they got clipped. Or on the flip side, I was 100% sure they got hit and they didn't, they dove. And the key here is it's like we were talking before this session. You were saying you were sitting in the stands at a recent game at MLS and you saw something, you said it was clearly a dive. You're sitting stationary, probably with a good angle on it. We're going all out running and trying to see something with players cutting in and out and etc. on that side, right? So simulation is something that historically we've been instructed, and by it's logically makes sense, is unless you're sure, if you like 100% sure where it's obvious, don't give it. Like it's embarrassing enough for the player to go down and you not make the call and to continue on. If there's some doubt, than it is to be wrong and give a simulation to a player on that front. So simulation is a difficult topic, and look, the game is global. It's around the world, and different regions of the world, their acceptance of simulation or cheating is much more. Okay, I can give you a story from the Pan American Games. I was there in 2001. Mexico was playing Ecuador, and this Mexican player right near the end of the game does a hand of God Maradona goal, scores on it. Okay, and the referees didn't catch it. It was a really tricky play. I wasn't on the game on that one. That's not a mistake I take credit for. And you think about that scenario playing out in Canada the next day, what the newspaper headlines would be if a Canadian player did that. In Mexico, I counted, there was 26 newspapers from across the country. I went to the newsstand, and every single one of them said hero, amazing, star, excellent, like we win, you know what I mean on this. And everyone had the picture of the player doing this. So what you have is you have a mix of cultures going on here that we in Canada, from our hockey mentality, we believe that it's not something you should do or like to win the game. Okay, and when you look at the shift of the Canadian national team, you're seeing them do now what it takes to win. Okay, you're seeing them bring more of the dark arts into the game and have that approached, and they're finding ways to win based on that. It's an interesting approach. So I'm not encouraging cheating as a referee. Okay, but I'm saying simulations is a difficult topic because in some parts of the world it's encouraged, never mind it's taught, and here it's different. So there we go, we have that struggle. Time wasting is a different one. I think you're going to see more and more of a trend towards things being addressed on the time wasting front. In the CPL, by the way, more so. MLS this year has come along as well. People kicking the ball away afterwards, things like that. There are cautions flying everywhere on it right now. So there's been a big movement and big direction on that side to try and stamp that out. And I know personally now, in watching more of the CPL and being involved in it to some degree, is it's pretty neat to see a player show up to a ball they normally kick away and they don't kick it away anymore. So okay, so it's happening. Let me put that one that way.
So now you're talking about progression of the refereeing stuff, and I want to bring you back to the first ever meeting in which you guys and girls obviously were introduced to VAR. How did that meeting go, and what was the general consensus when you guys walked out of the meeting? Were you for it, or you were a bit wary of it?
It would look. I'm an old school referee, so I can tell you the room on that was mixed. You had the people that were hallelujah, and the people that were like, "Oh, this is going to ruin the game." As soon as goal line technology was introduced, as soon as technology was brought into the game, for me, it's inevitable, and in fact, it's going to be more and more and more. They have their goal line technology. That same technology now can call offside. Yeah. It's like you're going to see, and the appetite in the world for human error from referees it's not there. Like, people do not want to see it. So as long as that's there, or that referees are not accepted as a component of like a player missing a sitter from 6 feet out and kicking it over the bar is not seen to be as bad as a referee in that same time of the game not calling a penalty kick, right? It doesn't get the same response. So VAR, like for me at that time, it was mixed. But I can tell you, as of like today or my last few games on this side, VAR is an angel on our shoulders. The number of nights I told you before where I lost sleep prior to VAR, there was tons. After VAR, I didn't lose any sleep because it's the major decisions, the key ones. Somebody is there to look over your shoulder, and if it's debatable, they're not going to send it. If it's black and white, those are the ones you want to correct. Okay. And so I don't know, it's been a powerful tool that's been implemented in varying degrees around the world, like to varying success, but I think it's been a good addition to the game that will continue to evolve.
And you guys are, people kind of forget that you guys need to keep fit to referee. So like off season, what does the routine look like to keep the fitness level up to the season? And do you have to do some work during the season also?
There are players used to look at our routines, our workout routines. We chuckle sometimes when we compare notes, especially like MLS is back and we're all in Orlando together. And I think we work harder on a fitness standpoint than the players do. It's 5-6 days per week. The first thing I do before I say hi to my wife in the morning is I have to put on my heart rate variability. I check that. The trainer then sends the workout for the day. And it's 5-6 days a week. We're in some combination of strength weight training that they've assigned for us, or doing the running or the cardio that we have to do to keep going. And it's amazing. Like I did not retire due to fitness. I could have kept going. It's amazing how far sports science has come for us and has helped us out.
So just some quick fire questions to finish off. What's the most memorable match you have ever refereed, and why?
I don't know if you remember Brazil in I can't remember the World Cup, the date, but when Neymar, the Colombians, broke his back, whatever. I'm bad for the dates on that side. So the first game where they played each other again, I did that. It was Colombia versus Brazil. It was in Sun Life Stadium in Miami. It was the published attendance is less than actually was because they didn't want to say they outdrew the NFL team there. And half the stadium was Colombians and the other half was Brazilians, and it was nuts. Like it was.
It was a friendly, or
it was a friendly. It was just a friendly. The handshake was Neymar with the person that broke his back. They were both captains shaking hands, and I'm in between them, and they're smiling, etc. But they're saying to each other, "I'm going to bleep and kill you. I'm going to bleep in this." And the World published it the next day of, look at this reconciliation. Look at these people being amazingly together. So it was a neat thing in history to be able to see that. So
wow. And who's your best referee of all time?
Me. Wow. Look, who else is there? No, I love anybody who takes on goes in referees. You told me before that you've refereed as well. Anybody that goes in referees, you are my favorite person, because you're being brave, you're courageous, you're going out there to do something that most people on the planet do not want to do, don't want to put themselves out there on. And yeah, you put yourselves out. So everybody who's ever refereed to me is my favorite referee. There you go.
And if you had one advice to give any good young referee who's aspiring to be a professional?
Like everything else in life, there's ups and downs. There's games that go great and you feel good, and then there's other games that don't go so well. So this is a skill almost, but I would say persevere, keep going, go back, if you get bucked off the horse, get back on and try again. The camaraderie amongst referees and to be involved in the game is so valuable. In my career, as I moved up in refereeing, I was moving up in my career as well. There's so many life lessons. There's not a boardroom on the planet I can walk into now where somebody's going to rattle me with what they say, because I've heard it all. I've heard it all. I've had stuff thrown at me. Don't worry, you can't get me. So nice. That's what I would say. Persevere.
Cool. And just the last one, a referee, you usually love the game of soccer too, right? So now that you're retired, do you keep an eye on what's going on in MLS and CPL in Europe? Like, do you watch soccer?
So what I did from November till recent, soccer's a drug, okay? And refereeing is to some degree is a drug as well. So I needed to detox. I needed to get away. I watched very little. Okay. I stayed away. A lot of family time, a lot of hiking trips, a lot of biking, different things and doing and spending time here at home with family. I've recently accepted a role. I'm now the professional referee game coach for the referees in Canada. So there's 13 referees now that I'm working very closely with and helping them be the best that they can be. So I'm really looking forward to that. As for watching now, I'm watching a lot of CPL games, etc. But look, I'm a Canadian. The Canadian national team, if they're on, I'm watching them. That's my team. If you want to ask what my team is, that's who it is. So
awesome. Dave Gantar, it was a real pleasure to have you. It was really interesting. And, we're really happy to have had a referee on and show that side of the game, because I think, it's an underappreciated side and a very tough one too. So thank you so much for stopping by.
Anytime. And truly bring more refs on. I'm sure they have more interesting stories than me. So
thank you.
Yeah, so that was a very interesting interview from David Gantar, so ex-MLS referee, but also the CPL referee that just retired. We don't often give them, a platform to express themselves, and I think he was very happy to be on the show. And I love his suggestion, saying that maybe referees should have media availabilities after. Elias being a media person that writes for the Canadian Press, like we said earlier, would that be interesting to have the referee answer questions directly to the media right after a game?
See, I think that would be an interesting concept. I'm only worried that if you make it standardized and every game the ref has 10 minutes or 50 minutes of media availability. Some games people will want answers about questions, but there's a lot of games where there's nothing too controversial, right? So
Yeah.
I don't see the long-term consistent need for it. And plus, one thing, again, we spoke about this before. My brother is a referee, and he follows all this stuff. And MLS have this weekly show where they break
Yeah.
down some of the controversial reffing decisions,
Yeah.
and he always shows it to me. He's like, look what this one. He's very passionate about it. But they always break down some of the more controversial calls of the week, and they step by step what happened, why did this happen. They give you an insight into the conversation surrounding the refs and the VAR if need be.
Yeah.
So it's they do have this sort of retroactive bit where they explain. I don't think that having them available every game will be necessary, because again, some games it just there's not
There's
much
nothing to say, huh?
of a need, right? And I don't think you could just cherry pick like, oh, this game you're going to talk to them, oh, this game you won't talk to them. It's going to have to be a standard thing, and I don't see the need for it to be every single game.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's up for debate, because I think that, as soon as, the referees will get used to that, I think the media will get used to that too. So maybe the questions sometimes will be, general, saying, oh, you know what, during the year you've given 3 yellow cards every game, but this game only one. Was the game, was the game a bit too easy to referee? I'm sure we would, being part of the media, we would find questions. Yeah. Exactly. We would find questions, and sometimes you have good questions and sometimes you don't, right? It's the same with the coaches. Sometimes you don't really have a lot to ask, right? So it's the same thing, right? So very interesting. I think it was a very interesting interview. Very funny guy. Loved the interview. I didn't watch it earlier, so first time that I watched it right with you guys. So really loved it. Elias, I want to thank you again, and for being here. Thanks a lot for staying the whole show with me.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun to be on. Again, like I said, so interesting to be on this side of the camera, see how the sausage gets made. So this is fun.
Perfect. And thanks a lot for everyone who tuned in and listened to that episode of The Ball is Round. Next week, we will have a show also. This time around, I'll be the one missing, but Yves and Sam will be here. We'll be back on the show for sure. We're very close to our 100th episode, so stay tuned. We're trying to make it big. So hopefully we'll have a big one that day. Thanks a lot, everyone, and see you next week for another episode of The Ball is Round.